There is no law in order to protect them.
No, I really disagree with that. It seems to me that this society is wealthy enough to provide all the material goods
Agreed.
that one would need.
Agreed.
And the only thing preventing that is corporations have to make profits. And so...
well, that's a non sequitur. Corporations making profits doesn't, that particular statement doesn't mean that poor people can't be provided with goods.
Well, I mean, look at the evidence. Are poor people provided with goods in this society? No, they are not.
Well, actually, in every society, there have been wealthy people and poor people. Now, I think there's one point you're overlooking.
Well, there's degrees to that.
Yes, I agree. Take something like, take fascism, take Nazism. People very often will compare things that happen in the nation today with Hitler's Germany. But I think the very most important point is racial persecution in Hitler's Germany was an official government-sponsored policy. In this country, the government is not in favor of most of the bad things that are happening. I don't think any objective person can say that Lyndon Johnson wants to keep poor people poor, or that any president. I don't think Nixon wants it. I don't think Humphrey wants it. I don't think Wallace wants there to be a poor class in this country. I don't think that the candidates are the villains that so many of you young people think they are.
No,
I think,
wait, radicals don't believe that individuals are villains. For instance, we're strongly opposed to the war in Vietnam, and we've made that distinction, say, about when McNamara was Secretary of Defense. We never said that McNamara himself is an evil man. He's trapped in a system. He runs a system which will dump napalm and burn to death thousands of Vietnamese. Yet if you brought a Vietnamese girl into to McNamara's office and gave him napalm to throw on her, he wouldn't think about that.
So it goes deeper. It goes deeper than people want. Well, you're right. You feel it's the system. Now, when you take something like poverty, again, and you mention corporations, and I come back to that because I've heard that so often, and I've read it in newspapers such as yours, and I know it's a point that many young people feel deeply about today. Doesn't it stand to reason that your American corporations wish that everybody were wealthy, because then they would have more consumers to buy their products? I don't think there are poor people because of the corporations. There obviously is a malaise in this country, as you say. We all wish we could have utopia and there would be no poor people. We're trying to work toward that end. I just don't think the solution is to throw bricks in windows or to say, if the law doesn't satisfy us, and if it doesn't make everything perfect, then let's abandon the law, or let's make up our own laws. Because I suspect things will be worse.
We did make up our own laws. Isn't that what?
No, I mean change them arbitrarily without democratic process.
But where is the democratic process in America?
Well, we have provisions for that.
Do you think those provisions work?
Well, they're the best set of laws, of rules for changing laws that have been devised yet. I don't think throwing a brick is a better system of creating laws.
But I haven't advocated the policy of throwing bricks. What I advocate is that people organize so that they can gather together and have power and redistribute power in this country, because I think that power is managed by a very few individuals.
Well, now you don't sound so radical. How do you fellows feel
That's
about
a very radical thing, because it involves at times throwing bricks.
You see, Stan, change in this country, at least in the last few years, has not come about without something like this. You don't say to white people, here is this whole class of black people who don't have the power they should have and don't have the rights they should have. And you don't say, all right, white people, you know about the problem, do something about it. It doesn't work that way. It works in a way that black people organize, that in reality, though I hate to say it, white people are beginning to fear black people. And without really being forced into it, I can't imagine the white people in this country really giving the black man what he deserves as a full-fledged citizen.
Chuck, I can't say I disagree with you. The only thing I'm afraid of is originally the civil rights movement was one in which the black man wanted integration and full acceptance. What I'm afraid of is that the thing has turned around because of the nature of events recently, and it's going to end up with the black man being more separated and more alienated from the white man than ever before.
You have to realize this, Stan, that before, when a black person, several years ago, when a black person said, I want to be accepted, I want to live in a middle-class home, I want to live in your suburb, what the black person was saying then is, I want to be white. The black person has stopped saying that now. He's saying that I'm black, I'm not ashamed of being black, in fact, I'm proud of being black, and I'm going to wear Afro prints to school. You remember that's one of the big problems they've been having in Chicago. And I'm going to not, keep my hair short. I'm not going to have processes done in my hair. I'm not going to have my wife or my girlfriend or my daughter have her hair straightened so that she can look like a white woman. I'm going to look like black people and be proud of the fact.
And everybody should have pride in what he or she is. I think as we have this talk, and with all the talks I've had with younger people, it should be fairly clear. I think I'm a member of the establishment. I find that at root, there isn't that much difference between what the establishment wants and what you young people want.
I think that's absolutely wrong. The establishment doesn't want to end the war. You talk about the corporations.
Well, wait a minute. How can you possibly make a remark like the
How can I make that
establishment
remark?
doesn't want to
Because
end
the
the
war
war?
has been escalated consistently over the last 5 years.
But you can very often get
That's
trapped
why,
into a
because
set
the
of
peace,
circumstances.
because the peace candidates who had the popular following were eliminated from the election.
Well, let me ask our other two fellows. Let me
By
ask
bullet
Skip.
in one case and by manipulation at the Democratic Convention in
But
the
it
other.
wasn't the establishment that did that. Let me ask Skip. Do you
Certainly
feel
it was in
honestly?
Chicago.
Do you get right back to you? Do you feel honestly that the establishment, that the older folks, don't want the war to end?
You're saying the establishment is
Well, I
just
assume
one
it is.
body, just one body. Everybody in this establishment is going out, or the majority of these people. I mean, I think that the industry that are making money, the people making money out of this war, don't want it to end. I think that the people who want to run for any position in this country, that want to placate and please and want to get our votes, will say, no, we don't want this war. These people who want to put an end to the war. I think that we got into this war. It was a mistake to get into it, and we're trying to get out of it. And now the excuse of getting
Well,
out
why
of it.
are we trying to get out of it if we don't want the war to end?
We do want the war to, we want the war to end with us. We want to wash our hands with this war, but we don't want the war to end. As long as you can just keep, if we can get our boys out of,
I mean, have a war without our men fighting?
right,
Just
but with
have a
our
war.
money going into it and getting our money back and sending over military aid and keeping Russia, communist aggression away and having American propaganda going over to South Vietnam and getting another protectorate or another, place under the American skirt, behind the American skirt, then fine, that's great. But we couldn't do that, so we had to send over our men to enforce it, and now we're trying to get them out. And we don't want to put an end to the war. They say get the men out, put an end to the war. They mean that they put an end to the war, then they can get the men out. There's no other way of getting our boys out of Vietnam. But if they could get our boys out of Vietnam by saying, well, I'm a new leader, I was just elected 2 years ago, Mr. Johnson, Mr. McNamara made a mistake, and I have nothing to do with it. I'm clean, so it has no disgrace upon my office or upon me if I say, okay, everybody come home. Right?
You see, unfortunately, I think it's a little bit of a simplistic view. Well, actually, I shouldn't say you can't. You can end a war by saying everybody come home, but there are too many other things involved. It just doesn't work that way. Maybe it should work that way.
Nothing works the way it should.
But it's unlikely that it ever would, that any government official, that any chief executive is going to say, I've decided to end the war, everybody come home, because there are so many other things involved. Do you agree?
Absolutely. For instance, markets in the Far East. Now, it's obvious that we would like to win the war and contain China. Now, the problem with that is the Vietnamese people aren't fighting on our side, and so that we have to set up some kind of puppet government in Saigon. But the problem with the politicians that run the country is, are they going to recognize the legitimacy of the National Liberation Front? And are they going to turn over control to them? See, they're caught in a contradiction because for 15 years we've been brainwashed about the international communist conspiracy. So now it's our devil theory, it's incarnate evil. And now at the same time bringing about peace in Vietnam means turning over the country to those people. And so it's a contradiction the politicians can't deal with.
Well, I don't know that anybody who isn't involved right in the higher circles really knows the full story. I must admit, I would never defend the war in Vietnam. I think it's an utterly indefensible war. I think it's a ridiculous war. I agree with the word you used before. I think it's an obscene war. I might add, I think just about every war is obscene. Certainly anybody who has any defense of war in general is somebody who's speaking a language that I don't understand. But I think you're being equally obscene when you say that the establishment, and whether you say what is the establishment, it isn't everybody or not, we all know who we mean by the establishment. When you say the establishment doesn't want the war to end, I think that's just a ridiculous statement. I don't think there's anybody except a few sick people.
What concrete steps do you see?
Well, isn't it possible that just as the young people today are floundering and are following different leaders and are first following this particular philosophy. They get the drug scene and the hippie scene. Then they suddenly follow the Maharishi, then Herbert Marcuse, and so forth.
Wait, the newspapers create those kind of...
Well, who knows how they're created, really, but the point is these things happen. Now, isn't it just as possible that the establishment is confused? I don't say that you young people aren't the ones to lead us out of this confusion. Really, the main point I'm trying to make is, I think the only way we can be let out, and certainly the young people are the only hope for the world, but only through a legitimate legal manner. I don't think anarchy is the answer.
Just a minute, Stan. When you're talking about the young people and how you think the establishment is confused, you're very right. Because, you know, people ask, where did the young people get, you know, where did they get all these ideas? And you know where they got them? They got them in Sunday school. They got them watching Roy Rogers on TV. They learned that you don't hurt people, that you don't kill people, you know, that you're nice to people who are weak. And yet they see the United States, a big, strong country, killing people in Vietnam, a very small country, and a very weak country. And they say that you don't do, that you're not dishonest, you don't steal. And yet they see corporation executives, you know, like the very epitome of the establishment, carrying on really shady deals because, you know, this is business and that's something different. They see a lot of things going on that really don't jive with what the Sunday school teachers and their parents taught them. Because the Sunday school teachers and their parents really don't believe what they taught the kids. And the kids really do believe it. Don't you think that's right, Jeff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the example that came to my mind is the F-111 scandal. We talked a minute ago about what did we think about Negroes stealing a TV set. Well, I just was thinking of the F-111, this airplane that's never really worked, and it's been a $6 billion robbery. Aircraft companies have built the taxpayers out of $6 billion for this worthless piece of junk.
Well, I don't think they knew it would be worthless, nor did they want it to be worthless.
No,
And I
they
really
wanted to
don't
cover-
think the word "bilk" is proper in that use, Jeff. I think
it absolutely is if you just don't hope for all the time good intentions and say, well, what concretely happened? The
Well, maybe
F-111
I'm a
didn't-
Pollyanna, but I just feel that most people have good intentions. I think
the intentions of the people with power is to maintain their power.
You see, I think the trouble, again, I agree with what you say, and what you say so much, but I think we're talking different languages. I am afraid that what has happened to the world is we have a good guy, bad guy syndrome. The people who don't agree with us are the bad guys. If you're a liberal, ergo all the conservatives are bad guys. If you're a bad guy, if you're a conservative, all the liberals are bad guys. You discount everything that the other side says. Now, you're not in favor of the war in Vietnam, and you're not in a minority. I don't know who can be in favor of the war in Vietnam, except a handful possibly, but because you're not in favor of that war, anybody who makes airplanes for the war, anybody who's connected with it in any way, isn't just producing an airplane because that's his business and he was ordered to by the government, and unfortunately this one didn't work, but he's bilking the public. It's too simplistic an attitude.
Absolutely not. They're not ordered to. They fight desperately
For the contract.
for
Oh, you're right.
contracts.
And then they're
First
ordered
of all.
to after they
and
get the
then
award.
secondly, it's the whole process of selling. They try to say, well, if we do a swing wing plane, that's much better than a fixed plane, and they get all their fast-talking industrial engineers
But don't you
in
see,
there.
you're
and aircraft
condemning a
designers.
mistake. Now, man
I don't
is
think it was a
fallible.
mistake. I think that after about the first $2 billion that were wasted, people began to understand that it didn't work. And if you go look through the congressional testimony of 2 years
Well,
ago, you
wouldn't
see
$2
that.
billion have been a bilking also? At what point do you feel it's
okay,
an
let's say
accident,
they
or
only
at what
built
point?
the public out of $4 billion and had a $2 billion mistake. Well, that's really major in my estimation.
You see, I think, listening to you fellas, and you don't really represent that different a point of view, any of you. I think that the nation is in pretty good hands because again and again, maybe I may be being Pollyanna-ish, but I think the three of you want something good. The only thing that is very difficult for the establishment, and I'm speaking now as a representative of the
I don't
establishment.
think you're part of the establishment. I don't think you have power.
Well, that's a good point, then let's define terms. To you, the establishment is just those in power.
That's right. Those people that control the levers
You
of
mean
power
the
of
political,
country.
the political leaders
Well,
and the
primarily
economic-
Corporations, the universities,
corporate leaders and the entrenched bureaucracy within the Pentagon and the government.
Well, now what about,
At the top level, I'm talking about the people at the very top levels of the society.
and they're the ones that you feel want the war to continue and
No,
want...
there's clearly a division among those people. But it seems to me, up until this point, that those people who would want the war ended, who find their interests elsewhere, are not dominating over those people within the establishment who would like to see it continue because they profit from it. Can I make kind of an economic point? In periods of war and economic upheaval, instability, corporations can often grow amazingly by these war contracts. Basic financial institutions, investment houses and banks, generally don't do as well because they work on a long-range perspective and they attempt to give investments and returns to people who would put money into their institutions. Now, the war in Vietnam is not in the interests of most of the New York bankers, for instance, but it is in the interest of the Southwest aircraft companies. It is in the interests of Brown and Root of Houston, which is doing a lot of the construction in Vietnam. And so
Now, what would they be
there's these
doing if
internal
not for
divisions.
Vietnam?
Well, maybe if
What were they doing
society had
before
better
Vietnam?
goals, they would, the money would be reallocated into welfare projects and taking care of some of the problems in this country.
I propose to you that most of these corporations, were the war to end, would have a brief period of dislocation, of relocation, and would be as solid as ever, and would just then be engaged in commercial ventures of a peaceful
What is
nature.
Boeing Aircraft going to build? It's
Well,
never built anything but planes.
Well, there's a great demand for airplanes in this country. The aircraft industry is still in its infancy. We're an expanding economy. We have a whole world ahead of us of air travel, a whole supersonic jet age
think
coming
You know what
along.
might happen to Boeing? You know what might happen if we stopped war in Vietnam? You'd find that in the sky we'd be fighting, Russia would be patrolled by Phantom jets made in America. You know, the standard
Very
joke, made in
possible.
Japan.
Very
Boeing would go on, make its planes, just send it over to Israel, like we're sending the Phantoms. They're talking now about selling it to them. They'd send over, why don't you?
Let's hold that for a moment, and we'll get right back to this point. Okay. Welcome again. I'm Stan Lee, speaking to Skip Weiss of the Daltonian, Chuck Skoro of the Columbia Spectator, and Jeff Shero, and I can read my writing pretty well, of the Underground RAT, the Underground newspaper RAT. And I'd like to ask about the hippie movement, which I have a feeling it's probably dead at the moment or dying. Now, am I right, or does anybody think that it's still alive, still has some life in it?
I think you're right.
Yeah. Now then, if the hippie movement is dead, and if underground newspapers are still doing well, then apparently the two weren't equated in any way.
That's right.
So you don't have to be a hippie to like the underground newspaper, and you don't have to be a hippie to want change in the nation. This was not just a hippie philosophy, possibly, as many people had thought it was.
When it came out with hardly any clothing, that was normal, with long hair and flowers, and the 200 people or 2,000 people out of the 17 million or 25 million, whatever it is, that live in our country, made news by saying love everybody, which is so much different from saying bomb everybody and, make money. So these people came out and they made a headline.
Well, you at the Dalton School